But love is spelled as commitment and sacrifice. Commitment and sacrifice. So whenever I feel I have to, die to self to accommodate my wife, or ask, oh, why me? And that doesn't happen often. But if I were to ask that, I remind myself quickly, of the initiative that Christ took on my behalf, on our behalf rather. And when I view that against the extent of Christ's self-giving, my sacrifice pales in comparison. The second thing is to follow the example of Christ. Now, husbands, you have to listen to this. Verse 25 to 30. If you know this passage well, you already know what you're going to, hear. Husbands, love your wives, as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her, that he might sanctify her, having cleansed her by the washing of water with the word, so that he might present the church to himself in splendor, without spot or wrinkle, or any such thing, that she might be holy and without blemish. In the same way, husbands should love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. For no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it, just as Christ does the church, because we are members of his body. So by the time I was 21, I had already fallen in and fallen out of love. So that was one of the reasons why I came to the Lord. But even as I became a Christian, I was not looking out for any more relationship. I was quite happy with the Lord. Until one day I heard a message, a sermon from this same passage by a preacher. And then I realized, learning from what he said, love has to be bigger than our human definition. And marriage has to have a bigger narrative than two persons falling in love. I realized that. And then from that moment, I said, if I were to get married, it was first to showcase the relationship between Christ and the church, rather than fulfilling my agenda and ambition. So as Christ is to the church, the husband is to the wife. And we know that every wedding, the centerpiece is love. But I want to ask, what kind of love? What is the love the husbands are supposed to emulate and demonstrate? So if you want to follow Christ, there are two ways. The first one, love is spelled this way. Love is not spelled L-O-V-E. Of course, Pastor Steve told us it is L-O-V. Never mind, that was the other sermon. But love is spelled as commitment and sacrifice. Commitment and sacrifice. So whenever I feel I have to, die to self to accommodate my wife, or ask, oh, why me? And that doesn't happen often. But if I were to ask that, I remind myself quickly, of the initiative that Christ took on my behalf, on our behalf rather. And when I view that against the extent of Christ's self-giving, my sacrifice pales in comparison. It is not insignificant, but it is quite small in comparison. Right? Marriage is discipleship to the max. The continuing dying of self. If husbands were to be like Christ, to be Christ-like at all, this area of loving one's wife as Christ loved the church must be at the forefront. And it needs to be observable and audible. So husbands, your love cannot be the undying kind. It has to be the willingness to die kind. Okay, the first, love is spelled as commitment and sacrifice. Second, love always seeks the betterment of the other. So like Christ, the husband is to build his wife towards holiness by nourishing, by cherishing, by cleansing her from any blemish or wrinkle. His joy is to see the wife flourishing. And the health and the glow of his wife is a testimony of the husband's loving care. But this gets increasingly more difficult as we age, isn't it? With all the moisturizers and the skincare lotions from all over the world, especially and including Korea's. And with the constant scrubbing, it's an uphill battle. Because we can only what? You can only delay the onset of wrinkles and blemishes. We cannot stop it. But thankfully, Paul is referring not just to the external rejuvenation. He's referring to the inner person in us. 2 Corinthians 4:16 says, so we do not lose heart. Though our outer self is wasting away, our inner self is being renewed day by day. And so ladies, when you see a new wrinkle emerging, you just have to what? Don't despair. Thank God. There's something inside is happening. You're growing more and more like Christ. Okay, husbands, we have to give proper and close attention to how our wives are doing in their development and growth. And address areas of concern, especially when they have given themselves fully, at work and also managing the household. So if we are to love our wives, we must regularly appreciate them, uphold them, and care for them as Christ would care for his church. Husbands, let's give our wives a hand. Why did you stall there? Because, you think, is he saying this literally or is he saying this metaphorically? No, I'm saying this literally. Don't just give them an applause. Give them a helping hand, They need a hand more than an applause. Amen? Now that one you should clap.